Blake 7 The Way Back. The interviews. Interview 1 with director Michael Briant. So let me just start off by asking you, Michael, in terms of where you grew up and what your childhood was like in terms of, because I think originally you wanted to be an actor. How did that come about?
I was really lucky. I got polio when I was 11 years old. I was in hospital, in isolation hospital for a while. There was a lot of it around back in the day. And I came out with a very slightly dodgy one leg. And I had a friend called Michael Caridio who was a child actor making films with Norman Wisdom, who was a comedic actor of the period. And it seemed to me that being an actor was a rather better solution to the fact that I couldn't do anything at school at all, rather than try harder. So I persuaded my parents to let me go to the Italia Conti Stage School, age 12, for one term to help correct my dodgy leg in the dancing classes. Age 12, I went to Conti's, I went to a drama school. That was in September. In Christmas, I was an elf and a rainbow child in Where the Rainbow Ends at the Royal Festival Hall. And my father, who wasn't really very enthusiastic about the stage school, immediately saw that I had talent in my tights and said that I could stay on for another term. After the first term, I became a relatively successful child actor.
So a few years later, you entered the BBC. I think you were about 21 then. What
yeah, I mean, when I got married when I was 18, which was also back in the day not that unusual, and I took a serious job selling soap powder for a year or so, and later on selling makeup products, because I felt as a married person I needed a serious job, until I read an advertisement in the Guardian, or the Telegraph, Guardian I suspect, for directors, PAs and ASMs at the BBC. And because I'd been a stage manager in ASM and whatever in my sort of pre-marital career, I applied for a PA's job, which I thought I might get, and I ended up with an ASM's job, which is fair enough because that's a stage manager's job and it was what I was qualified for. So I joined the BBC age 21 as an AFM, an assistant floor manager on a 3-month contract for a quarter of the money I was earning selling makeup products, and never looked back.
What was the BBC like in the early 60s?
Oh, it was magical. It was absolutely magical. I mean, everybody who worked in drama department, and indeed the other departments, everybody who worked in drama department came either from the theatre or the film industry. So nobody came from university. Nobody nobody had degrees in media study. They were only people who actually had worked in the industry. So we all talked the same language. We all knew from our past careers in the theatre or film. And television, television is... Well, television has been described as radio with pictures, but working in television was an extension of working in the theatre or working in the film industry. So it was just magical. And all the bosses had come in the same way. I mean, all the people who ran television came from the entertainment industry. Billy Cotton Jr., David Attenborough, who became head of BBC Two, which was what caused this enormous expansion, which brought in people like me because BBC Two was opening up. David Attenborough had been making documentary films for the BBC. So everybody came out of the entertainment industry, and it was great. Nowadays, everybody seems to have come out of anywhere except show business.
What is a day in the life of an AFM? What does that look like?
In a production office in those days, you had a relatively small production office with 4 people sitting in there, which was the director, the producer's assistant, who was the lady who ran the office, ran the production, did it all. The PA, production assistant, was like the company manager. And there was the AFM, who was the stage manager for the production. So the four of you sat together in the office, and actually, as quite a junior person, you were involved. The four of us made the show, even on that bottom rank. You sat in that office. Yes, you were writing out your prop list. You were reading the script just as you would do in the theatre, and writing down all the props that appeared in the script. And from that prop list, you produced a prop list which you sent off to the prop buyer for the properties department and the designer to purchase the action props or the props that you thought were necessary. You wrote, the AFM wrote down action props. If you needed a sonic screwdriver, you wrote that down, what required one sonic screwdriver. If you required a tea set, you required a tea set. Anything that the actors were physically involved with were action props, so you made that list. And then the director would tell the AFM about items that he wanted specifically, the stage management type items. So you were responsible for that. And then come rehearsals, you went out to the rehearsal room and you marked up with tape on the floor of this church hall, getting splinters in your fingernails. You marked up the set and put down markers at each end of the set for the director to know where the set ended. And you would order furniture from a guy called Joe Hughes, who everybody would remember, who was in television in that period, who supplied rehearsal props, supplied duplicate furniture for rehearsals. And you put that in the set. And you were then responsible for drawing the furniture on the camera plan, because in those days, the camera plan, the studio camera plan, was produced by the director, made the original plan, the PA made it legible, and the AFM put on the furniture in the exact positions where it was going to be. And the lighting director, and indeed the sound guy, but the lighting director would then plan his lighting plan from this floor plan, aiming his lights at the furniture that the AFM had put down. It was very much like being a stage manager or assistant stage manager in the theatre. It was a similar job, but more accuracy required. I think it was 2 years AFM, and then because television was, drama department was just expanding exponentially because it was BBC Two, because ITV had recently come in. So I became a production manager, PA. I became PA after about 2 years as an AFM. And after a year of it, I started saying out loud, I want to be a director. And there was a choice really at that stage. You could become a director from the PA's job, or you could become a producer. I'd always wanted to be a filmmaker, if you like. When I was 12, one of the first things that happened, when I was 14 at drama school, I appeared in a film called True as a Turtle, which was directed by Wendy Toy with John Gregson, L.B. Hale, Keith Michelle, people like that. And the money from that, I bought myself a little 8mm Palliard Bolex film camera, a wind-up film camera with one interventional lens, and you needed a meter to get your exposures, and you set everything on the lens. And so I started at that stage making little films, making little 8mm films, which had to be 3 minutes long, or was it 6 minutes? I can't remember, because that was the length of film that you could get in the camera. So I always wanted to be a director. A lot of my colleagues wanted to be producers because I guess they saw, well, because they wanted to be producers. I produced once in my life, and I really wasn't very good at it. But I was sort of reasonably okay at being a director. I went around saying, after a year of being a PA, I want to be a director, imagining it would be 3 or 4 or 5 years before the job came along. But it seemed to me it was necessary to put down my marker. After 2 years of being a PA, to my horror, because I didn't think I was truly ready for it, they said, would you like to go on the director's course, which was a 6-week course? And I went, well, naturally I said yes, but it was with some fear and trepidation, because I'd seen this as happening in another couple of years.
So you said it's a 6-week course. What do you cover in 6 weeks that can turn you into a director?
Absolutely nothing. It was a course aimed really at people from sports department or from current affairs or from news or whatever, to give them a chance to work with cameras. As a PA working in drama department, I had worked with a lot of really talented directors like Alan Bridges, like Rex Tucker, like Peter Hammond. As a PA, I'd worked on classic serials, mainly on classic serials and Doctor Who. I was really very lucky. I worked on really quite good quality shows the whole time. So I worked with very good directors, and I learned from those directors what I needed in order to become a director myself in terms of the technique. The 6-week course was at the end of it, you made your own little production. The BBC paid for 2 actors. Well, they gave you a budget of 60 quid, I think it was, to employ 2 actors, and you had a small budget for a set. So trainee set designers who were on different courses altogether, but a trainee set designer would design the set for you for their budget. And I employed 2 actors, which were John Abineri and Jean Marsh, who later went on to do Upstairs, Downstairs. And she had been in The Crusades, which I'd been either an ASM or PA on in Doctor Who. So Jean did it for me, and John had also been in a classic serial or something, which I'd been a PA on. And they both, for 30 quid each, came along and did this little production for me. And you went into a TV studio for the first time and you made your production. And then that production was shown to producers in drama department, and producers then decided if they wanted to risk giving you a chance or not. There were 3 of us on that course who were from drama, and the rest, as I say, were light entertainment or current affairs or whatever, which didn't really involve anything. Of the 3 of us, 2 of us had been PAs, and we both went on to be directors. The 3rd one had come from somewhere or other, done one film very well indeed for the BBC, shot on film as a drama production, but just couldn't handle multi-camera business in a TV studio of having 5 cameras there and shooting shows almost as for live. I mean, back in those days, you didn't edit very much, so you certainly had to be able to do one scene live. And there was even a production called 30-Minute Theatre, I think it was, which went out live. I mean, back in the day. So if you could, you had to be able to handle multi-camera. And for those of us who had been PAs, you just knew how to do it, because if you didn't, you failed. The 2 of us who had been PAs went on. The guy who had only ever done film failed abysmally. And when he got his first TV production to make, a recording, fortunately, couldn't do it in the time for the money, because the requirement was in the time for the money. It needed to be good for you to get another job, but the bar was you had to be able to do it in the time, and you had to be able to do it and not overspend.
Was the first program you directed Z Cars, or was there something else?
First show I did was Z Cars. Yes, it was a Z Cars. I got given 1 Z Cars to do. And I thought I did it horrendously badly. I mean, I thought it was just awful when I put it together. I was in despair. Technically, I didn't really. It wasn't too bad. It was interesting. Inevitably, it had night filming, and night filming on location is always difficult because simply the problem you have to be very precise about what you're doing. And the lighting cameraman was not too impressed by this sort of middle-aged 45-year-old lighting cameraman. Wasn't too impressed by this 24-year-old, 25-year-old childish-looking director. Was fairly sarcastic about everything I wanted to do. So that was fine, but it didn't really faze me because I've been working with my 8mm Palliard Burlex film camera, so I knew what was possible and what wasn't. So that was okay. It was the Z cars. I thought I did it very badly. Other people thought differently, and I got offered more work after that. I ended up doing Angels, was a hospital series about nurses, the doctors. I got offered quite a lot of work. So I spent about 2 years being a PA, being upgraded to being a director. And I was making the first Doctor Who I did, which was Colony in Space. I did as a PA. I did in that 2 year period. You would get paid an extra £10 a week for directing, I think it was.
What roughly was the wage for a director at that stage with the BBC?
When I went to the BBC, I was getting, as an ASN, I was getting £815 a year. I think as a PA, I was on £1,250 a year. As a director, £10 a week would be a gross exaggeration. It was more like £2.50 a week. I mean,
But by the time you came to direct Blake 7, what was the pay much better by then?
No, it wasn't actually. I became a director. I had no choice but to resign. The BBC started quite rightly stopping having staff drama directors because they felt drama directors got old, aged 45 or 50, and they didn't want to keep them on after that age. They also just didn't want to be lumbered with staff directors, which producers didn't want, because producers always want new, young, talented people who are going to make their reputations and be embryonic Steven Spielbergs making Jaws, age 25 or 26. The BBC didn't want any more staff directors. So I had the choice between staying on as a PA on the staff and maybe becoming a producer or becoming a freelance director. And I said, hey, I want to be a freelance director, please. And Ronnie Marsh, who was head of serials, called me into his office and said, I hear you're going to resign. You want to be a freelance director. You've got a wife, you've got children, you've got a mortgage. You're an idiot. Stay in the BBC and you can become almost anything you like. And I went, yeah, but I think I'd rather be a director, Ronnie. And he went, it's not a good move. Freelance directors have a pretty dodgy time. And I went, well, I know. And he said, well, okay, fine. And the guy gave me, I walked out of the office saying, okay, yeah, that's my resignation, signed it. I went off, I said, I'll take the risk. And Ronnie gave me a year's work. As a freelance director, he gave me a year's work for my first year as a freelance director on, I think it was about 3,000 a year. I think it was about 3,000 a year a freelance director got. If you worked 52 weeks of the year, which of course you didn't. I mean, there were spaces between jobs. And after that first year, I was totally reliant on my next job. After the first year, work came at me. I was really, really lucky. It's quite good because I'm no longer directing, so I can look back at my work now and go, I was actually a better director than I thought I was, looking back. At the time, I thought I was pretty not very good, but quite a lot of work kept coming at me. I mean, Barry Letts was busy giving me Doctor Who. I later started off doing classic serials. I just never stopped working. I worked hard at it. I wrote letters, I made phone calls, I made an effort to find work. But actually, I nearly always had 1 or 2 jobs, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months in the future on offer to me.
What does a day in the life of a director looks like in terms of if you're handed a script like The Green Death? How many months of work is that, and what's involved with you as the director from beginning to end?
The run-up period between joining the production and the first day of location filming, because there was always location filming on almost every production, that period was 6 weeks. So you bowled in to your production office, went to the organizer's office, found out where your office was, walked in there where your PA, the lady, would be sitting, possibly the production associate, and possibly the SM, sat down, and there, if you were very lucky, and it was a 6-parter, there might be 1 script sitting on your desk, because scripts were always late. There were never... If it was a 6-part, there were never 4 episodes or 6 episodes sitting there. There was 1, if you were really lucky, or a synopsis. So the first thing you did was you sat down, read the script, read the first episode, went and talked to the producer, you found out how many days filming there was, you found out what the show was really about from a synopsis or whatever. And then you started reading the scripts, and from reading the scripts, you then had to get into casting. You then had to get into set design. You then had to get into costume design. You then had to get into makeup, wardrobe, visual effects. You then started making lists. One thing I learned from Dougie Camfield, who was a very good director, God bless him, he taught me to make lists and to write memos. He was in the army, but the army taught him that, and that was something that he brought to television, was make lists and write memos. So as a director, you sit down and you're making your list of what you've got to do, what springs to mind with sets, and if you contacted anybody about something, you wrote a memo confirming what it was you were on about, so there was no real issue. If you write a memo, get it in writing, then go and chat, then go and talk, then go and have a beer or a drink or whatever. The beginning of it was the casting. I guess the most important part was the casting, and the directors in those days did all the casting. As you were reading the script, you were busy imagining what sort of actor you wanted for each role. So that was probably the first thing that happened. And then as you were reading the script, you were going, the sets, what sort of sets do you want it to, how do you see the set? How do you see the scenery that's going to be, that you're going to shoot it in? Then, as more scripts came in and you began to be able to see the location filming and so on, you would start talking to the PA, who was also reading the scripts and going about what sort of locations you saw it as, what sort of places were in your mind, so that the PA could then go off and find possible film locations for you. And indeed, as I said earlier, if there was special prop stuff, you would be discussing that with the AFM. Pretty busy. 6 weeks to make if it was only a 4-parter, that's 100 minutes of television. Think about it, 100 minutes of film, and you've got 6 weeks to prepare it in. If it's a 6-parter, you've still got 6 weeks. It's an enormous amount of work. You would be in that office, okay, maybe not until 10 in the morning, but you'd be in that office from 10 in the morning till 6, 7, 8 at night, 5 days a week. And it was tough and most enjoyable and exciting.
How much time you need for lead time for sets, costumes, or those things have to be made
6 weeks. You
in
you
that
had 6
6 week
weeks.
period?
You had 6 weeks. That was it. Because you very seldom, if you were freelance, yes. On Blake 7, for example, David was busy showing me episode 1 script saying, you really, really want to do this. But I never saw the web. I never saw any of the other shows I was doing because they weren't written. They didn't exist. And I don't think I saw the final version of the web. I think I saw the first 20 pages and then the synopsis. As a freelancer, you really only saw the full production the moment you sat down 6 weeks before you started filming.
And so filming begins with location work, then
Yes.
into rehearsals, then the studio. So that
Yes,
takes
I mean,
a couple of weeks, 4 or 5
in
weeks.
serials, it varied. It varied. There were 3 departments in drama then. There was drama serials, drama series, and drama plays. Drama plays was something different. It was very often all shot on film on locations. That was different. But both series and serials, broadly speaking, had a period of preparation into a period of location filming, and you came out of location filming into rehearsals, and there would be, for 25-minute show, there would be 4 days rehearsal and then 1 day in the studio. If you were doing 2 episodes at once in the studio, which was the way Doctor Who worked, and I think the newcomers worked, you would have 8 days of rehearsal and then 2 days in the studio. Blake 7, for example, which was 50 minutes, had, I think it was 8 days rehearsal, then 2 days in the studio. So it was a 10-day turnaround for 50 minutes of actually doing it, of actually rehearsing the show, and then 2 days of shooting it in the studio.
So after filming it, what's your job as director then? How much longer does your job go on for after that?
Okay, if you're doing a Blake 7, for example, you know you've got another one coming up. So I had a contract to make 3 and ended up making 4 because I did one of David's for him. The first thing to do is to get into editing. So you go to something called the Shabarden room, where they had 1-inch tape on super deluxe VHF players, reel-to-reel tape, but it's only 1 inch. And you sat down with that, with your assistant, going through it, checking what set, because VT editing time was very expensive. And on a show like Blake 7, there would be far more editing than you would on a police thing or a medical show or whatever, or even a classic serial. Far more, because of the special effects, because of everything that was involved. You would sit down with this Shabarden tape, which had all the material you recorded. I think it had the film material on it, plus all the studio material, with timecode in display. And you would go through it with your assistant, making timecode notes ready for the online edit. So in the Shabarden room, you've maybe spent a couple of days making those notes, deciding where you were going to edit, which takes you were going to use, what you were going to do exactly. So when you walked into VT in the basement with a online editor, you would be able to give him time code to run to. So your assistant would say, 14, 13, 27, 4 frames is the next edit. And he'd roll to that. And then you actually, the frames are, you would then, with the editor, finesse the edit or make it work or whatever. And he would do the thing of leading the sound or letting the sound. Audio tracks are always a problem. They're a different issue from the visual. So you couldn't do much about that in audio. The VT editor would then put together your 50-minute show from the notes that you've done from your Shabarden offline editing. At the end of a day's VT editing, you then get another Shabarden tape and you sit down with the music composer and discuss where you're going to have music, which was basically when I felt I hadn't done a very good job, you needed a bit of music over that, or you needed something to enhance it or whatever. So you'd sit down and you'd spend a few hours. And the next thing that happened after that was, at some point in the future, there would be the dubbing session. There would be the music recording session, where you went along basically to support the composer. I mean, he would be there. He would employ. He would have a budget for so many musicians. So you would spend normally an evening in a music recording studio at Lime Grove, normally, with up to half a dozen musicians, tops, plus the composer, with the, like in film, with the picture up on a screen or on a big monitors, recording live the music for the composed music. And as a director, you would sit there and look knowledgeable about it and go, yeah, that sounds terrific. And the composer was paid by the second or by the frame. So the composers were always very keen on having the last note dragging on a little bit, because another 4 or 5 frames, it used to be a joke, meant another tile for the swimming pool that Dudley was installing if it ran on for a dee-dee-dee. And then the composer would take it away, and in Dudley's case, he would then enhance it in his own. And it was Radiophonics Workshop. That's right. The Radiophonics Workshop would also be busy making sounds for you for doors opening, closing, guns, all the stuff that wasn't, all the effects. And in Blake 7, there was a lot. Radiophonics would be busy with the same bit of tape making the sound effects for you. And then a short period later, and I really don't remember what that period was, you would go into a dubbing theatre, spend an entire day with the composer, the Radiophonics effects, which would be marked up in a script and given to the Grams operator, who would have all this on 1/4-inch tape, reel-to-reel 1/4-inch. You would dub the show from beginning to end in pieces, piece by piece, and it would take an entire day to do a dub. And at the end of that day, you would do a review of it to make sure that it was all right. So it was always a pretty long day in the dubbing suite. So that was for the. Now I imagine an awful lot of the time I imagine working on the next production of Blake 7 that was coming in, which in this case I think was the Web, I think. So I'd be sitting there waiting for the scripts to come in, because there'd only be one there would be the script, there'd be the draft of the script, and you would be discussing the script. And because Terry Nation wasn't that good about writing full scripts, I mean, Terry's idea of a full script was like about 30 pages, and a 50-minute show is 50 pages. An awful lot of writing was done in the producer's office to get the thing up to length. And so whilst you were doing these post-production things, you would also be working on the next episode, doing the casting, doing the locations, doing the effects, and so on. As a freelance director, I would normally do 2 shows a year. And broadly speaking, it would be something like a classic serial, for example, which would actually take you 6 months, a classic serial, because it was 6 episodes, or something like Secret Army, where, like Blake 7, I would be booked to do 3 episodes. But they're 3 50-minute episodes, so that would be 6 months' work, 7 months' work. And then I might do something like a Doctor Who or a Blake 7, or I'd go off to London Weekend and do Within These Walls, or I'd go to Yorkshire Television. As a freelancer, I would do 1 or 2 shows a year, because I was really, really lucky, and I used to get quite good quality shows to do. And quality shows normally have some physical length to them.
So, what part of the directing process is the bit that you enjoyed the most?
Oh, just the whole thing. I mean, it is. I mean, that's why it's such fun being a director, or it was in those days. I mean, because it is the whole. You're not going to get bored churning out, close-ups. That's not what you do. You have projects, and you're interacting with a lot of creative people. All the way, you're interacting with costume, makeup, designers, composers, whatever. And with the actors in the rehearsal room, with the camera crew, with the whole thing. So it's just the whole business of making. I mean, you get to make you get to make these stories, you get to make these whole things. So it is the entity of being a director that is so magical, or was so magical. I think it isn't today, but it was the fact that you got given this production to make, and in those days, you made that production yourself from beginning to end.
Why did you never come back to Blake 7?
At that stage, my career was sort of peaking, and I had so much work offered to me. I don't think I was ever asked, but equally, I think I was never available. I don't know if Veer asked for me or not, but I went on. I was doing Warship, I was doing A Tale of Two Cities, I was doing Treasure Island, I was doing Secret Army, I was doing Kessler, I was doing Blood Money, I was doing Hideaway. I had work coming out of my ears.
What are you most proud of all of the things you've directed? What's the standout production for you?
I think Secret Army was pretty good, and A Tale of Two Cities. I think of all the shows I did. Secret Army, I think, was where I grew up as a director, and I felt it was thoughtful show to work on. And A Tale of Two Cities, which I actually wrote the adaptation, most of the adaptation for, pretty well exactly the way I wanted to do it. Got an Emmy for it, but just as a show, I thought it was a very good interpretation of Dickens's novel. I think we did it. I think I did it quite well. So I guess in my career, I love doing Warship. I'm a sailor, really. I love doing Warship. Blood Money was pretty good as well. I'm a jobbing director. If the script's any good, I just love doing it. I just like doing it.
You're very self-deprecating as a director, but some of the shows you've done are some of my favorite shows of all time. Robots of Death is my favorite all-time Doctor Who show.
Robots. I knew I was never, ever going to do another Doctor Who, although I did ask John Nathan Turner once for a job, and he refused to have me on the show.
Why?
Yeah, because he felt directors who've done it before had nothing new to bring to it, I guess.
Yeah, because you would have worked with him on Doctor Who before, wouldn't you? He would have been around.
I knew John Nathan. Yeah, I knew him. I mean, he became somewhat odd when he became a producer. I mean, he
Too much
changed.
power.
Yeah. No, I mean, on Robots, I just, I was talking about you push frontiers. I had nothing to lose because I never wanted to do the show again. I mean, only because I felt I'd done everything that there was to do on it. And I was absolutely determined to go off and do other things, which was why I didn't want to do Blake 7. So on Robots, I just went, I am going to do this exactly the way I want to do it, and to hell with anybody, because I've got nothing to lose. I don't care if I never do another Doctor Who. So in a way, that gives you even more freedom. Whereas if you are a jobbing director on a series, and that series is your bread and butter, you are going to want to sort of you're going to toe the line a little bit more.
So you never regretted going freelance?
Oh no. I mean, but hey, I was 23 or 24 or something, and you don't believe that you're going to sink when you're that age. You don't believe that you're not going to be able to climb the mountain. You don't believe that you're going to go bankrupt and not be able to pay the mortgage. You don't believe you're never going to. I was always aware that you might never work again, when you're that age, hey, if you want to be a director, you're a director.
Why did you never come back to Blake 7?
At that stage, my career was sort of peaking, and I had so much work offered to me. I don't think I was ever asked, but equally, I think I was never available. I don't know if Veer asked for me or not, but I went on, I was doing Warship, I was doing A Tale of Two Cities, I was doing Treasure Island, I was doing Secret Army, I was doing Kessler, I was doing Blood Money, I was doing Hideaway, I was doing, I had work coming out of my ears. So I don't remember being asked, but I had so much very nice work happening.
What are you most proud of all the things you've directed? What's the standout production for you?
I think Secret Army was pretty good, and A Tale of Two Cities. I think of all the shows I did. Secret Army, I think, was where I grew up as a director, and I felt it was a very cerebral, very thoughtful show to work on, with brilliant actors. And A Tale of Two Cities, which I actually wrote the adaptation, most of the adaptation for, and did it pretty well, exactly the way I wanted to do it. Got an Emmy for it, but just as a show, I thought it was a very good interpretation of Dickens's novel. I love doing Warship. I'm a sailor, really. I love doing Warship. Just adored doing that. Blood Money was pretty good as well. I'm a jobbing director. If the script's any good, I just love doing it. I just like doing it. It's very small money, but I get more money out of Blake 7 residuals and DVDs than I do out of any other television production I've done.
No, more than Doctor Who.
Okay. Yeah, more than Doctor Who. Yeah.
Okay.
This new Blake 7
Blu-ray,
I understand, has vastly outsold all their expectations. There almost certainly will be another one.
Yeah.
And from the way people in the know deny it, I'm fairly sure a reboot is being heavily discussed. Just before I left to fly out to Guadeloupe, my Blu-ray of, my copy, they sent me a freebie copy. My copy arrived, and I sat and watched my stuff in it just to see what it was. Well, you want to know what they've done with it, what they've used and what they haven't used. And I just simply didn't have time to sit and. I want to view the episodes with the new effects, because I'm very aware that our spaceship effects, a lot of our effects were very creaky. They were very whatever.
Yeah, you know what? Because I watching your episode, the way back again. With things like the London taking off, and the original effects and the new effects. I actually prefer the original. I think it's still got more heart and more, because it's not digital. It's got more reality to it. So having compared the two, I actually still prefer.
The Blu-ray effects aren't digital, though. They're all studio. They were all done in studio, weren't they?
There's some model work there, but they've also done other work.
I understand. As well. I understand. I don't know, but my understanding was that all the model shots, and I think I saw bits of the web for some reason, because I've done a few Blake 7 interviews. The model shots have all been redigitized. They've all been reshot. They've all been redone. That was what I understood.
I think they use real models.
Certainly, I would say the web was my first sort of crossing swords with this effect, was because I wanted certain web shots, which I specified and told them a list of, and they just shot what they felt like. And I thought the shots I didn't think it looked very good. I thought it looked pretty Thunderbirds ago.
Listen, Michael, thank you so much for your time. I'm aware that we've kept you for a very long time, which I'm very appreciative of.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. It's been a pleasure. It's a pleasure talking to you, and And it means that I don't have to get down to my editing for a while.
That was Blake 7 The Way Back, the interviews with director Michael Briant. Join us next time as we look at Spacefall, and our next interview will be with Sally Levette.